Futures trading involves a substantial risk of loss and may not be suitable for all investors. Therefore, carefully consider whether such trading is suitable for you in light of your financial condition.
Good morning. It's Friday, January 23rd. I'm Phil Streible, Chief Market Strategist at Blue Line Futures. So precious metals popping again in the overnight session here. The question is, where will silver stop? Is it $150? Who knows here? We'll start looking at some of those option spreads again here for potential breakout and another catalyst and move higher with it reaching triple digits nearly overnight. So looking at some of the overnight headlines, looking at the impact on the markets here. So stocks slightly weaker, but they've been recovering. There was some news with regards to NVIDIA popping in the overnight session here, lifting back that NASDAQ, which looks like it's about to turn positive. You do have gold and silver hitting record highs. And the focus next week is going to be on some more traditional catalysts. We're going to look at the earnings season, and we're also going to look at some Fed policy decisions. So the rundown on the metals markets here, looking at gold, 49.25 last, getting up to 49.70 in the overnight session, 49.01 being the low. That's all on that February contract. Now the 14-day average true range sits at about $99 an ounce, so quite a bit of volatility there. You look at the pivot point here, 47.05. The key level of trend support, 44.84. And looking at that silver market, 14-day average true range, $5.25. So futures up about $2.50, sitting at 98.79. The high of the overnight session, 99.39.5. The low, 96.22. So continuing to have those wide ranges, but tacking on about 2.5%. You look at some other things here as far as trend support, it's going to be right around 86.63, and the pivot point's going to be about 88.54. You look at the precious metals, the ETF flows, well, they were buying gold, buying platinum, buying palladium, selling some silver here. So the exchange traded funds, they added about 156,000 troy ounces of gold to the holdings in the previous session here. And total gold held by ETFs rose 1% this year to 100 million ounces. And it's the highest level since August 30th of 2022. So quite an explosive move higher. I mean, gold is up about 14% year to date. And the other indice out there, getting back to some of the stock indices, the Russell 2000 tacking on about 10% this year. And it's really looking at some of this forward picture here of what's going on. You look at the silver market, the daily percentage change dropping about 0.2%. And year to date, those total ETFs, they have declined about 2%. So the ETFs, they continue to be large moves where they're adding and they're selling out. So yesterday, they sold about 2 million troy ounces of silver in those holdings in the previous trading session, leaving that gold-silver ratio right around 49-1. So if you look at some of the broader markets and the macro markets here, there's some renewed concerns about the possibility of U.S. military action in Iran. That's setting oil prices back up about $1, sitting up 1.5% at 60.38. Natural gas prices, do yourself a favor, look at a daily chart on that, because just this week alone, natural gas prices are up over 50%, going from about $3 on up to $5. So looking at FEBNAT gas last, just hovering right around that $5 mark, dropping a bit here, but an explosive move to say the least here. It's on this cold front that's moving through. So if this weekend you're anywhere up in the Midwest, in the Northeast, and the Northwest, you're going to want to bundle up here. It's going to be negative 30 degrees with a real feel. So the macro markets, they are rebounding overnight. Again, with the S&P 500, you're going to have 63 of the S&P 500 companies they've reported so far this season. 78% have beaten the analyst forecast, 14% have mixed. Next week is going to be the busiest week of earnings season when companies of about 1/3 of the S&P will report. So some volatility there. Now looking at economic data, you got to have January PMIs for manufacturing and services are going to come out. The Consumer Board's leading index for October and November, and University of Michigan sentiment, their final reading on consumer confidence is going to be released as well. You look at some of the rate cut expectations, because that's one thing I keep an eye on. The latest survey out of Bloomberg shows that the Fed is not seen cutting rates again until June. And it says that they're really not under any kind of pressure to immediately cut rates here after strong back-to-back quarters of economic growth. You look at the central bankers, they are in that blackout communication period here, and that next meeting is going to be next week here on the 28th. Only a 2.8% likelihood that they'll cut rates. And you go to March, it's 15%. So really, we're going to want to start looking at June here and who the administration, President Donald Trump, is going to select as the next Fed chairman. You'll get the FX risk and rundown here. The dollar 98.17, the euro currency 117.62.5. So dollar a little bit weaker, euro pushing up just a bit. WTI crude oil futures for March back over $60 here. That's kind of your pivot point at the moment. Not really breaking out to any kind of significant trend. You could do yourself a favor, draw a trend line straight from 2025 January all the way out through this year, and you'll see that we've been in a pretty steady downward trend here. Only that one explosive move on geopolitical risk between the US, Israel, and Iran boosted prices up to $80, but couldn't get much higher than that before the rug pulled, because very difficult for Iran to shut down the Straits of Hormuz, because they're just going to accept their key allies and neighbors around them. So look at Bitcoin here. Bitcoin rebounding a bit here. If you're going to play that Bitcoin market, look at the February contracts. Same thing with Ethereum, as those January contracts expire next week, with Bitcoin down about 0.5%, but rebounding above that key level of trend support, 87,600. I covered Bitcoin yesterday on a television program, and one thing that we discussed here is that the amount of platforms that are taking on leverage bets on there where you can utilize margin and things like that, what's happening is that you see Bitcoin break some key levels of support, and what it does is a forced liquidation goes on where the machine itself is auto liquidating people because of the leverage play, and it was like over $1 billion in liquidity here just flushed out on that breakdown below the $90 mark. So we'll see if futures can capitulate at all. You'll get the S&P 500, the gamma exposure, still a little bit skewed here on the negative side, and we could expect to see that continue on here. And we'll want to keep an eye on some of the other volatility matrix that are out there, because the volatility index did jump up to about 20 before briefly backing off here. So really keep an eye on, as we get over 20, you start to see that VIX pick up here, and the S&P 500 gamma exposure get a little bit more negative out there. Now, Europe and Asia, those European stocks, they were muted. Asian stocks, they closed higher with some concerns about the tariffs in Greenland. They're kind of fading away here. So the MSCI Asia Pacific Index tacking on about 0.7% and recouping all the losses from earlier in the week. Two things that I'm watching here: the Bank of Japan, they maintained their benchmark rate at 0.75%, but issued some higher than expected inflation forecasts. So the swaps are pricing in another 25 basis point hike in June. And then China, they actually set a lower economic growth target to 4.5% from 5% in 2026, reflecting some mounting signs that activity will continue to slow. So we'll see if that has any repercussions on any of these industrial metals. Doesn't show whatsoever here, but we'll want to keep an eye on is when you get key data comes out from China, is there an effect on the metals markets? And then we can see what different strings are pulling things as far as movement in a lot of these metals. So I hope you guys have a great weekend here. Hoping to go fishing again. Weather's kind of a little bit wonky. We had some rain here today, but you get some of that unpredictable weather, and that seems to stir up some of the currents, some of the wave activity, and then you'll get those fish getting a little bit more active, because when it's stagnant and cold, the only thing that's out there is sharks, bonita, stingrays, and catfish out in the Gulf. So we'll see, and I don't like catching any of those whatsoever. So we'll see how it plays out. But I hope you guys have a great weekend. You need anything, shoot an email to info@bluelionfutures.com. Remember, futures and option trading does involve risk of loss. May not be suitable to all investors. Good luck, good trading.
Futures trading involves a substantial risk of loss and may not be suitable for all investors. Therefore, carefully consider whether such trading is suitable for you in light of your financial condition.